Good day, eh? Uh, yeah, I guess that will become a standard here. Welcome again to another Mr. Kilroy presentation on behalf of the Freedom Pages. I'm just going to continue on with the common law versus legislation. I really didn't plan on a two-parter, but I guess this is a deeper subject that requires a little bit more. Again, I take this straight from Peter Landry's website, Blue Pete. He is a Nova Scotia lawyer, professor at Dalhousie University, also a prodigious writer. I've linked him below. He has a goldmine and wealth of information on things, historically speaking, philosophically speaking, in law and society. He's well worth going to if you are the least bit interested. Okay, but before I begin, a C.S. Lewis quote. Who is C.S. Lewis? Well, 2 minutes in Google and you'll soon know. He's the writer or author of the Narnia series of books. Yes, he's an unabashed Christian, but again, he's quite an intelligent man. Shouldn't discount him just because of that. But here's his quote, nonetheless. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better off to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be sated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. Well, any way you slice it, that's some very wise words. If we haven't noticed that there's all kinds of people that do nothing but lobby the government to make us behave in the manner that they want us to. And it pretty much sums up how our government works. We used to have great thinkers who went on about old tyrannies of Europe, the value of freedom, the nobility of spirit of a man in his struggle to free himself from serfdom. They even went so far as to say what the proper role of government is in protecting this liberty. But here we go, the origins of legislation. The word legislation is derived from the Latin words standing for law and bringing. A quick check of the OED reveals that originally the word had more of a religious meaning than anything else, in that an act of legislation was an act of a high priest revealing a divine law. Today we understand that legislation consists of sets of rules which a majority of legislators sitting in their legislatures declared to be laws, which, as such, become enforceable through the coercive power of the state. Today, and for some time now, these rules have been printed up and bound into books. Statute books. You've heard me talk about statute law. Before the days of solemn legislatures, it was not thought necessary to write laws down in any one place. Indeed, legislation, as I have just explained, did not much exist before the creation of the first legislatures. It never did fill any prominent place among the duties of a king. Originally, the principal function of legislatures was to control the power of the king. They did this by controlling the supply of money for the needs of the crown. Thus, in its earlier day, the legislature was an overseer of the power of the crown. It pretty well restricted its lawmaking activities to that of making rules for itself, and of course rules as to what trading commodities were to be taxed so that to raise money for the crown. Again, statute law, for the most part, only dealt with monetary funds. Now, again, we're speaking very much in the British Anglo-Saxon British sense of parliamentary process. France, which ran under a completely different principle, actually did have living tyrants in the personage of the king. Prior to the passing of the Great Reform Bill of 1832 by the British Parliament, little thought was given to improve the state of society by the use of legislation. Indeed, it would be difficult to point to much positive social legislation passed prior to the arrival of the 20th century. Pretty much, you were left to your own devices. In the late 19th century, we see examples of legislative effort to codify the existing law. The Infants Relief Act of 1874 was but a declaration or publication of a common law development that an infant's contract is voidable at the infant's option. Same can be said for the Sale of Goods Act of 1893 and the Law of Property Act of 1925. In most of its aspects, these were legislative attempts to sort out the apparent higgledy-piggledy status of common law. This was an innocent start, but all lamentable situations which lodge themselves inextricably, it seems, usually make their appearance with an innocent start. In Western democracies, the social engineers were given a full head, particularly after World War II. And the quantity of meddlesome legislation picked up in an exponential manner and continued over a 40-year period or so. It's only in the last decade we have seen, as the huge social bills begin rolling in, some reversal of process, which was tapping out the two essential ingredients of social activity, no matter the kind, incentive and liberty. Well, yeah, I'll give you an example. I was speaking to a lawyer at a function once, and when he started practicing law in 1967 in the province of Ontario, there were 6 volumes of statute. Now, speaking him back in 2009, I believe it was, there were over 18 volumes of statute. Overall, there are 1 million statutes if you count all bylaws and provincial and federal statutes. I dare say it's impossible to not be an offense of one such statute at any given point in time in your life or in the day in your life. That's the trouble with statute. It just stacks up. It never goes away. Rarely is it repealed. It costs millions of dollars. As soon as somebody says the government should do something about that, well, right off the top, just to get the government moving, there's something like $6 million just gone down the memory hole. Now there's all of the lobbying, the committees, and everything to study the problem and to draft the legislation. Again, we live in a day and age of the expert. So consider, statutes really only ever take away individual liberty. The common law sought to protect your liberty. As I said, the only time the law was ever triggered, and I mean the common law, real law, because it came from us, the people, we. The only time it was ever engaged is when an injury had occurred. In other words, it never sought to prevent behavior. Statute, on the other hand, seeks to try to prevent. It's social engineering. It is a government wanting you to behave in a certain way, and they're willing to use boots on the ground to make sure that you do. Now, closing up, I'm going to close up with Lysander Spooner, who was an American individualist, anarchist, political philosopher, deist, Unitarian abolitionist, supporter of the labor movement. Okay, so he's got good social credentials, legal theorist, and an entrepreneur of the 19th century. He wore two hats, I see. Lysander Spooner. What then is legislation? It is an assumption by one man or body of men of absolute irresponsible dominion over all other men, whom they can subject to their power. It is the assumption by one man or body of men of a right to subject all other men to their will and their service. It is the assumption by one man or body of men of a right to abolish outright all natural rights, all the natural liberty of all other men, to make all other men their slaves, to arbitrarily dictate to all other men what they may and may not do, what they may and may not have, what they may and may not be. It is, in short, the assumption of a right to banish the principle of human rights, the principle of justice itself from off the earth, and set up their own personal will, pleasure, and interest in its place. All this, and nothing less, is involved in the very idea that there can be any such thing as human legislation that is obligatory upon those whom it is imposed. Like I've said, inevitably legislation becomes statute, another species of law. And again, if you want rules made by the sorcerer's apprentice, keep lobbying your local politician. I, on the other hand, lobby my local politician and my government to repeal laws. We need freedom, liberty, the ability to thrive and prosper. We're not going to do it under this current social debacle that we have known as Canada. Like my little picture says in my videos, Canada, if it sucked any worse, they'd call us France.